They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. But the photograph I found hidden in my father's study wasn't just worth words, it was worth billions of dollars. Decades of lies and the truth about why Marcus Wellington, one of America's richest men, fired the pregnant black cook who worked in his mansion. I'm James Wellington, and what I discovered that night didn't just change my inheritance. It exposed a secret that would destroy everything my family built. The woman they all dismissed as just the help. She was the only one who knew the truth about who really owned the Wellington fortune. And when I finally understood why she came back after 40 years, I realized that revenge is a dish best served cold, but justice? Justice is served at exactly the right temperature. Before I reveal how one photograph brought down an empire built on deception and how a woman they tried to destroy became the richest person in the room, hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when the truth finally comes to light. Subscribe to our channel because this story will change everything you thought you knew about power, privilege, and patience. Click subscribe now. My name is James Wellington, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was. The heir to the Wellington Hotel Empire, son of Marcus Wellington, destined to inherit billions. Quote, but sometimes the truth has a way of finding you, especially when it's been buried under 40 years of lies, legal documents, and the kind of systematic cruelty that only old money can buy. It started on a Thursday evening in November. I'd just returned from Harvard Business School for a Thanksgiving break, driving my new Tesla through the gates of our estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. The rain was coming down hard that night, the kind of rain that makes you think the sky is trying to wash something clean. The mansion stood like it always had, 32 rooms of old money arrogance, each brick paid for by 3 generations of Wellington success. The lights blazed from every window, making the place look like a cruise ship floating in the darkness. Staff members hurried back and forth, preparing for our annual Thanksgiving gala. 500 guests would arrive in 2 days, the same politicians, celebrities, and billionaires who came every year to kiss the ring of Marcus Wellington. As I pulled into the circular driveway, I noticed something unusual. A beat-up Honda Civic was parked near the service entrance, looking completely out of place among the Mercedes and BMWs of our regular staff. It had Pennsylvania plates covered in rust with a dignity despite its wear that reminded me of something I couldn't quite place. My father was in his study when I arrived, bourbon in hand, staring out at the grounds where workers were setting up heated tents for the gala. The Hartford Symphony Orchestra was rehearsing in the ballroom, their music drifting through the walls like ghosts of parties past. He didn't turn when I entered, but I could see his reflection in the window, tired, older than his 59 years, carrying something heavy. James, he said without turning around. You're late. Traffic out of Cambridge, I replied, though we both knew I'd stopped to see a woman he wouldn't approve of. Keisha worked at a nonprofit in Boston, the kind of place my father donated to for tax breaks, but would never actually visit. She was brilliant, beautiful, and worst of all in his eyes, she reminded him that there was a world outside our bubble of privilege. Your grandmother's coming tomorrow, he said, finally facing me. At 73, Marcus Wellington still looked like he could buy and sell God himself. His gray hair was perfectly styled, his suit cost more than most people's cars, and his eyes held that cold calculation that built our empire. But tonight there was something else there. Fear? Regret? She wants to discuss your trust fund, Grandmother Eleanor. 89 years old and still sharp enough to make board members cry. She lived in the guest house on the property, a mini mansion that could house a family of 10, refusing to die just to spite the people waiting for their inheritance. She controlled everything through the family trust. My father might run the company, but Eleanor held the purse strings. Let me guess, I said, pouring myself a scotch from his crystal decanter. She wants to add more conditions? She wants to make sure you're ready, my father said. The Wellington name means something, James. It's not just money, it's legacy, it's responsibility. It's a cage, I finished. A golden cage, but still a cage. He looked at me sharply. That cage has given you every opportunity in life. The best schools, the best connections, the best of everything. Everything except the freedom to be myself. Freedom is a luxury we can't afford, he said, and for a moment his mask slipped. None of us can. I'd heard this speech 1,000 times. The Wellington legacy. The Wellington standard, the Wellington way. What I didn't know was that the entire Wellington empire was built on a lie that started in this very house, in the kitchen 3 floors below where we stood. That night, I couldn't sleep. Jet lag probably, or maybe it was the way my father had looked at me like he was seeing someone else, someone from long ago. The rain had stopped, leaving everything outside gleaming and clean. I went down to the kitchen around 2 a.m. for water and found someone already there. She was a black woman, maybe 60 years old, wearing a housekeeper's uniform even though it was the middle of the night. She moved around our professional-grade kitchen with the confidence of someone who belonged there, who knew every appliance, every drawer, every secret corner. She was standing at the 12-burner stove, cooking something that smelled like heaven, a complex mix of spices that made my stomach growl despite the late hour. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't mean to disturb you. She turned, and for a moment, her face went through a series of expressions: shock, recognition, something that looked like grief, then careful neutrality. In that split second before she composed herself, I saw a lifetime of hidden emotions. "My God," she whispered. "You look just like him, like my father?" She shook her head quickly, as if coming out of a trance. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wellington, I'm Grace. I just started working here last week. Night shift, I prepare things for the morning." "At 2 a.m.? Your grandmother likes her breakfast at 5 a.m. sharp," Grace said, her voice steady now, but her hands still trembling slightly as she stirred something on the stove. "Takes me 3 hours to make everything perfect. It's very particular. The eggs must be exactly 63 degrees. The toast, golden but not brown. The coffee beans ground to precisely the right consistency." Something about the way she said it, the familiarity with Eleanor's demands, made me curious. "You've worked for my grandmother before?" "A long time ago," Grace said carefully, turning back to the stove. "Before you were born. Before your father was." She stopped herself. It was a different time. "How different?" She was quiet for a long moment, her hands moving automatically through the familiar motions of cooking. "Different enough that a young black woman could work in a house like this but never be seen. Different enough that certain things could happen and nobody would ever speak of them. Different enough that secrets could be buried so deep even the dead couldn't whisper them." Her words sent a chill through me. "What kind of secrets?" She turned and looked at me directly then, and her eyes held a depth of knowledge that made me feel like a child. "The kind that built empires, Mr. James. The kind that destroyed lives. It's the kind that are about to come home to roost." Before I could ask more, we heard footsteps on the stairs. Grace's entire demeanor changed instantly. She became smaller, quieter, invisible. My father entered the kitchen. "James, what are you doing up?" "Couldn't sleep." "Met Grace. She's preparing grandmother's breakfast." My father looked at Grace, and something passed between them. A recognition, an understanding, a shared secret. "Grace," he said quietly. "Mr. Wellington," she replied formally, but her voice carried weight. "I didn't expect you to start until next week. Mrs. Henderson said I should come early. Get familiar with Mrs. Wellington's preferences," Grace said. "Of course." He paused. "James, go to bed. Tomorrow will be a long day." I left, but I stood in the hallway listening. "You shouldn't have come back," my father said quietly. "I had to," Grace replied. 40 years is long enough to carry this alone. She'll destroy you if she finds out. She already destroyed me. What more can she take?" "Everything. I don't have anything left to lose, Marcus. But you do. Your son does. Is that a threat?" "It's a mother's concern," she said, and even from the hallway I could hear my father's sharp intake of breath. "Don't. Please. I've been silent for 40 years. I've watched from afar as you grew up, got married, had children. I've kept every newspaper clipping, every magazine article. I know you graduated summa cum laude from Yale. I know you married Catherine Worthington on June 15th, 1998. I know James was born on March 3rd, 2000 at 3:47 a.m. I know Victoria was born on November 18th, 2003, 2 months premature but a fighter from the start. How could you know the exact time? Because a mother always knows, Marcus, even from a distance, even when the law says she's not a mother at all." I pressed closer to the door, my heart pounding. "Mother? Grace was my father's mother?" "You signed the papers," my father said, his voice breaking. "You agreed to stay away. I signed under duress. Your mother, Eleanor, she had me arrested. She was going to have me sent to prison for 20 years for a theft I didn't commit. I was 23 years old, pregnant, black, and alone. What choice did I have? And now I'm 63. I have terminal cancer. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe 8 if I'm lucky. I'm not here for money or revenge. I just wanted to see you again, to cook in this kitchen one more time, to be close to my son and grandchildren before I die." The silence that followed was deafening. Then I heard my father crying, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from his soul. "Mom," he whispered. "No," Grace said firmly. "Don't call me that. Eleanor is your mother in every way that matters to the world. I'm just the help. That's all I can ever be." I slipped away then, my mind reeling. Grace Thompson was my grandmother, my real grandmother, the woman who had given birth to my father, who had been forced to give him up, who had spent 40 years watching from the shadows. The next morning, Grandmother Eleanor arrived for breakfast in the main dining room like a queen entering her court. She sat at the head of the table in a wheelchair she didn't need but used for effect, making everyone bend down to her level. Her white hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, her fingers heavy with rings that could fund a small country, the 40-carat Wellington diamond, the Burmese ruby that had supposedly belonged to a Maharaja, the wedding ring my grandfather had given her, worth more than most people's homes. "James," she said, her voice still strong despite her age, carrying the authority of someone who had never been denied anything. "Sit." I sat. "Your father tells me you're seeing some girl in Boston." "A social worker. Her name is Keisha. She's a civil rights attorney." "How progressive of you." Her Her tone could have frozen hell. Tell me, James, what do you know about sacrifice? I know I've been fortunate. Fortunate? She laughed, but there was no humor in it, just the bitter sound of someone who had sacrificed everything for power and called it victory. You have no idea what was sacrificed for your fortune, what was taken, what was buried, what was stolen from people who deserved better. Before I could ask what she meant, Grace entered with the breakfast tray. She moved silently, professionally, her face a mask of servitude. The moment grandmother Eleanor saw her, the room temperature dropped 10 degrees. The old woman's face went through a transformation. Shock, rage, then something that looked almost like fear. You, my grandmother breathed, her hand going to her throat where she clutched her pearls like a lifeline. Grace set down the tray with steady hands. Good morning, Mrs. Wellington. What are you doing in my house? I work here now, Grace said simply. Mr. Wellington hired me last week. Get out. Eleanor's voice was deadly quiet, the calm before a storm. Get out before I call the police. Eleanor, my father said, entering the room. He looked exhausted, like he'd been up all night wrestling with demons. What's going on? This woman is not welcome here, my grandmother said, her voice shaking with rage. Fire her immediately. I don't understand, my father said, and his acting was perfect, confusion mixed with concern. She came with excellent references. Her name is Grace Thompson, my grandmother said. She worked here 40 years ago. We fired her for theft. She stole jewelry worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Grace stood perfectly still, dignified despite the accusation. I never stole anything, Mrs. Wellington, you know that. We both know what really happened. You stole more than you could imagine. My grandmother hissed, and I realized she wasn't talking about jewelry. I didn't steal him, Grace said quietly. You did. The words hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Eleanor, please, Grace continued, her voice steady but her eyes blazing with 40 years of suppressed truth. Not in front of the boy. The boy? I was 24 years old, but the way she said it made me feel like there was so much I didn't know, so much hidden history in this room. Get out, my grandmother repeated, or I'll call the police. I still have the original police report. I still have witnesses who will swear they saw you with my jewelry. Witnesses you paid, Grace said. Staff members you've threatened. People who needed their jobs more than they needed to tell the truth. Are you calling me a liar? I'm calling you exactly what you are, Eleanor. A thief who stole something worth more than all your jewelry combined. A woman who used her power to destroy a young girl whose only crime was loving your husband and carrying his child. The silence was deafening. I looked at my father, whose face had gone pale. My grandmother's hands were shaking as she reached for her tea. You're delusional, Eleanor said. Marcus is my son. I have the birth certificate to prove it. You have adoption papers hidden in a safe, Grace countered. Papers that show Marcus Thompson became Marcus Wellington when he was 3 days old. Papers I was forced to sign while handcuffed to a hospital bed, still bleeding from giving birth, while police officers stood guard. Dad, I said, looking at my father, is this true? He closed his eyes. James, this is complicated. It's not complicated, Grace interrupted. It's very simple. Your grandfather William had an affair with me. I got pregnant. Eleanor couldn't have children. Her perfect body couldn't produce an heir, so she made a deal. She would raise my baby as her own, and I would disappear. When I refused, she had me arrested, planted evidence, and gave me a choice. Sign the adoption papers or go to prison and have my baby taken anyway. You were a gold digger, Eleanor spat. You seduced my husband. I was 23 years old. Grace's composure finally cracked. I was a young woman working 16-hour days in your kitchen, sending money home to my family in Philadelphia. William pursued me for months. He said he loved me. He said he would leave you. He promised me a life together. And fool that I was, I believed him. She pulled something from her pocket, a faded photograph, the same one I would later find in my father's study. This was taken 2 weeks before you had me arrested. Look at it, Eleanor. Look at how happy we were. Eleanor wouldn't look, but I did. The young woman in the photo was radiant, obviously pregnant, obviously in love. The man beside her, my grandfather, looked happier than I'd ever seen him in any family portrait. He loved me, Grace said quietly. And that's what you couldn't forgive. Not the affair, you'd had plenty of your own. Not the pregnancy, you needed an heir. But the love. The fact that he loved the black cook more than he'd ever loved you. Shut up, Eleanor hissed. He was going to leave you. He'd already seen lawyers. But then your father threatened to cut off the money, didn't he? The great Cornelius Ashford, who'd built the fortune that William married into. He wasn't going to let his daughter be humiliated by having her husband leave her for the help. I said, shut up. So you made a deal with William. He stays married to you, you raise the baby as your own, and everybody wins. Except me. Except the woman who grew that baby under her heart for 9 months, who went through 18 hours of labor alone, who had her child ripped from her arms before I could even name him. Tears were streaming down Grace's face now, but she stood tall, 40 years of pain and dignity in her bearing. I named him anyway, she whispered. In my heart, I named him David, after my father, David Thompson. But you erased that too, didn't you? Made him Marcus Wellington, like he was just another acquisition for your portfolio. My father moved then, crossing to Grace. Mom, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Eleanor stood up, shaking with rage. Don't you dare. I dare, my father said. It's been a coward for 40 years, but I dare now. This is my mother. Grace Thompson is my mother, and you stole me from her. I raised you. I gave you everything. You gave me everything but the truth, everything but love. You gave me privilege and education and money. But you also gave me the knowledge that I was never really yours, never really wanted except as an heir, never really loved except as a possession. He turned to Grace. I found out when I was 18. Eleanor got drunk at my graduation party and told me everything, how she'd bought me, how my real mother was trash who didn't want me, how I should be grateful that she'd saved me from poverty. That's not true, Grace said urgently. I wanted you. I fought for you. I know, my father said. I hired investigators. It took me 5 years to find the truth, another 10 to find you. You changed your name, moved 6 times, trying to disappear. But I found you 5 years ago. Grace's eyes widened. You knew? You knew where I was? I couldn't contact you. Eleanor made it clear that if I ever reached out to you, she'd disinherit not just me, but James and Victoria too. She'd destroy the company, liquidate everything, leave us all with nothing. So you chose money over your mother, I said, disgusted. I chose my children's future over my past, he said. But I was wrong. I see that now. Eleanor laughed, cold and bitter. You're a fool, Marcus. You're throwing away everything for a woman who abandoned you. She didn't abandon me, my father said. You stole me. And then you spent 40 years making sure I knew I wasn't really yours. That I should be grateful for every crumb of affection. That I was living on borrowed legitimacy. You are my son legally, yes, but we all know the truth. Every time you introduced me at parties, there was that slight hesitation. This is my son, Marcus, like you were trying to convince yourself. Every time someone commented that I didn't look like either you or William, you'd get that pinched expression. Every time I excelled at something, you'd say it was because of the Wellington education, never because of any natural ability I might have inherited from my birth mother. He walked to the window, looking out at the estate grounds. Do you know what it's like to grow up in a house full of portraits of ancestors who aren't yours? To learn family history that you're not really part of? To carry a name that's not your own? You're being dramatic, I'm being honest, finally. After 40 years of living your lie, I'm being honest. Victoria walked in then, my younger sister still in her pajamas. What's going on? I could hear shouting from upstairs. Your brother is having a breakdown, Eleanor said coldly. Your father's telling the truth, I corrected. Grace here's our real grandmother. Victoria looked confused, then shocked as my father explained everything. Our mother entered halfway through, still in her traveling clothes. She'd come back after all. Catherine Wellington, N.O.E. Worthington, from another old money family, stood there absorbing the news that her entire marriage had been built on a foundation of lies. You knew? She asked my father quietly. You knew all this time and never told me? How could I? How could I explain that everything we built was based on a lie? That our children's inheritance came from a theft not just of money but of identity? We need to make this right, I said. We need to tell everyone the truth. The truth? Eleanor laughed. The truth will destroy you all. Every connection, every business deal, every social relationship you have is based on the Wellington name. You think those people care about you? They care about what you represent. Take that away and you're nothing. Maybe being nothing is better than being a lie, I said. You naive child. You have no idea how the real world works. I know how it should work, I said. It shouldn't work by destroying families, by stealing children, by using wealth and power to crush anyone who doesn't fit your image of perfection. Grace had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke. I don't want to destroy anything. I didn't come here for revenge or money. I came here because I'm dying and I wanted to see my son one more time, to cook in this kitchen one more time, to pretend, just for a few months, that I belonged here. You do belong here, my father said. More than any of us. No, Grace said. I'm staff. That's all I ever was. All I ever can be in this world. But I wanted you to know, Marcus, that not a day went by when I didn't think of you. Not a single day when I didn't wonder who you were becoming, if you were happy, if you were loved. I was provided for, my father said carefully. Eleanor made sure I had the best of everything, but were you loved? Grace asked, and the question hung in the air like an accusation. Eleanor's face was stone. I did my duty by him. Duty, Grace repeated. Is that what you call motherhood, duty? It's more than you did. I would have died for him. Grace's voice broke. I would have given everything for him. You think I didn't try to get him back? I spent every penny I had on lawyers only to be told that the adoption was legal, that I'd signed my rights away, that I had no case. I wrote letters that were returned unopened. I tried to get jobs with families in your social circle just to catch a glimpse of him at parties. I lived my entire life as close as I could get without violating the restraining order you put on me. Restraining order? My father looked shocked. You had a restraining order against my mother? She was stalking us, Eleanor said defensively. Showing up at your school events, your birthday parties. I was trying to see my son. He was my son by then. Legally, morally, in every way that mattered. Except in his heart, Grace said quietly. You couldn't make him love you, could you? You could make him obey, make him grateful, make him successful, but you couldn't make him love you the way a son loves a mother. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. Get out. Get out of my house. It's not your house, my father said quietly. It's mine. The deed was transferred to me 5 years ago for tax purposes, remember? And Grace stays. The silence that followed was electric. Eleanor looked at my father like she was seeing a stranger. You would choose her over me? After everything I've done for you? You didn't do it for me, my father said. You did it for yourself, for the Wellington legacy, for the appearance of the perfect family. You needed an heir, and I was available for purchase. How dare you? I dare because it's true, and we both know it. Eleanor stood up, shaking with rage. If you keep that woman here, I'll disinherit you all. Every penny, every property, every stock option. The trust fund, the company shares, everything. It will all go to charity. Do it, my father said. I'm tired of being owned by you. Eleanor looked at each of us in turn, my father, defiant, my mother, processing Victoria, confused. Me, determined. Then her gaze fell on Grace. You did this, she hissed. You poisoned them against me. No, Grace said sadly. You did this yourself, Eleanor. 40 years ago, when you decided that your pride was worth more than a child's right to know his mother? Eleanor left then, slamming doors behind her. We heard her car start, tires screeching as she drove away. The 5 of us stood there in the sudden silence. My mother was the first to speak. Grace, she said, I think we need to talk. All of us. As a family. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Family? Family, my mother confirmed. If you'll have us. We spent the next 6 hours in that dining room, talking, crying, learning the truth. Grace told us about her romance with William, how he'd pursued her relentlessly, promising to leave Eleanor and marry her. How when she got pregnant, he'd been overjoyed at first, then terrified as the reality of what it would mean sank in. He wasn't a bad man, Grace said, just a weak one. He'd married Eleanor for her money, thinking he could learn to love her. But she was cold, calculating, treating marriage like a business merger. When we fell in love, it was the first time he'd felt alive in years. But he chose the money, Victoria said. He chose the easy path, Grace corrected. Eleanor's father controlled everything. If William left, he'd have nothing. And by then I was 3 months pregnant. He convinced himself that the baby would be better off as a Wellington than as the child of a divorced man and a black cook with no money. So he agreed to Eleanor's plan? Not at first. He fought it. But Eleanor was smart. She didn't just threaten him, she threatened me. My family, she had connections everywhere. My mother cleaned houses for a living, my sister was a nurse, my brother had just started a small business. Eleanor made it clear that she could destroy all of them with a few phone calls. So you gave up your baby to protect your family, my mother said, understanding. I tried to fight. I really did. But when you're young and black and poor, fighting people like Eleanor Wellington is like fighting the ocean. You can rage against it all you want, but it's going to win. My father reached across the table and took her hand. I'm sorry. For all of it. You have nothing to be sorry for. You were a baby. You didn't choose any of this, but I chose to stay silent when I found out. I chose to keep you at a distance to protect my inheritance. You chose to protect your children, Grace said. I understand that. A parent does what they have to do. We talked until sunset, and in that time I learned more about my family's real history than I had in 24 years. I learned that Eleanor had been unable to have children due to a botched abortion in her 20s, the result of an affair with her tennis instructor. I learned that William had tried to send Grace money over the years, but Eleanor always found out and stopped it. I learned that Grace had never married, never had other children, because she couldn't bear the thought of replacing the son she'd lost. I tried, she said. I dated a few times. Bet every time I looked at another man, I thought about how I'd have to explain that I had a son out there somewhere who didn't know I existed. How could I start a new family when my first one was incomplete? The Thanksgiving gala was the next day. 500 guests were expected. The preparations were in full swing, florists arranging centerpieces, musicians doing sound checks, caterers preparing a feast. But our family was falling apart. Eleanor had barricaded herself in the guest house, refusing to speak to anyone. She'd called her lawyers, her financial advisors, everyone she could think of to begin the process of disinheriting us all. My mother was staying, but she and my father were barely speaking. Victoria was in shock, trying to process that her entire identity was based on a lie. And Grace? Grace was in the kitchen, cooking. It's what I do when the world doesn't make sense, she said when I found her there at midnight. I cook. I create something beautiful and nourishing from raw ingredients. It's the one thing Eleanor could never take from me. She was making something elaborate, a dish I didn't recognize. What is it? Cuckoo veng? It was the first fancy dish I ever learned to make back in culinary school. I made it for William on our first real date. He said it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. You went to culinary school? She smiled. Johnson & Wales. Top of my class. I was going to open my own restaurant someday. That was the dream. What happened? The Wellingtons happened. The job here paid 3 times what I could make anywhere else. I needed the money to help my family. I thought I'd work here for a year or two, save up, then open my place. Instead, I fell in love with a man I couldn't have and lost everything. It's not too late. You could still open a restaurant. She laughed, but it was sad. I'm 63 years old with terminal cancer. My time for dreams has passed. How long do you have? 6 months? Maybe 8. Pancreatic cancer. By the time they found it, it had already spread. Does my father know? No. And you can't tell him. He has enough guilt to carry. We stood there in comfortable silence while she cooked. Then she said something that changed everything. I wasn't entirely honest with Eleanor today. What do you mean when she accused me of theft? I did take something when I left. Not jewelry, but something much more valuable. She went to her worn purse and pulled out an envelope yellowed with age. William wrote this the night before I was arrested. He didn't know Eleanor was planning that, but he knew something was coming. He gave this to me and told me to keep it safe, that it would protect me and the baby if anything happened to him. What is it? I never opened it. I was too afraid, then too angry, then too tired. But maybe it's time. She handed it to me. You open it. My hands are shaking too much. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in William's handwriting. As I read it aloud, Grace's face went white. My dearest Grace, if you are reading this, then Eleanor has won and I have failed you. I am not brave enough to fight her and her father, not strong enough to choose love over comfort. But I want you to know that you own more than you realize. Before I met you, I was nobody, a failed businessman living off my wife's family money. The Wellington Hotel Corporation was Eleanor's father's gift to us, but it was failing. You were the one who suggested we focus on boutique luxury instead of competing with the large chains. You were the one who created the signature dining experience that made us famous. You were the one who trained the staff to provide the service that became our hallmark. The recipes, the ambiance, the very soul of what made the Wellington Hotels special, that was all you. I have documented this in a legal filing that my lawyer is holding. If you ever need it, contact Charles Brennan at Brennan Foster and Associates in New York. He has papers that prove you are entitled to 40% of the Wellington Hotel Corporation as the creative force behind its success. I pray you never need to use this, that somehow we can be together. But if not, know that you own part of what we built together. All my love, William. Grace stared at the letter, then at me, then back at the letter. 40%? 40% of a company now worth $12 billion, I said, my mind reeling. Grace, you're not just my grandmother. You're one of the richest women in America. You have been this entire time. She sat down hard, the spoon she'd been holding clattering to the floor. I don't understand. How is this possible? We need to call that lawyer. Brennan, Foster, and Associates. They must still have the documentation. It's been 40 years. Surely it's too late. There's no statute of limitations on ownership documents, I said, pulling out my phone. We need to verify this immediately. It was past midnight, but I called information, found an emergency contact for the firm. Within an hour, we had Charles Brennan Jr. on the phone, the son of William's original lawyer. Miss Thompson, my father waited 40 years for your call. He died last year, but he left very specific instructions about your case. Can you come to New York tomorrow? What case? Grace asked. The case that proves you co-founded the Wellington Hotel Corporation. My father's been holding the documents since 1983. Stock certificates, signed contracts, even recordings of William Wellington acknowledging your role in creating the company. You're not just an heir, Miss Thompson, you're a founding partner. The room spun. Everything we thought we knew was wrong. Grace wasn't the victim in this story, or rather but she was also something else. She was the secret queen of an empire she'd helped build. We have to tell my father, I said. No, Grace said, not yet. Let me understand what this means first. But there was no keeping this secret. By morning, the news had somehow leaked. Maybe it was the late-night calls to lawyers, maybe it was one of the staff who'd overheard our conversation, or maybe it was just time for truth to surface. When I came down for breakfast, my father was already in the dining room with a team of lawyers, and Eleanor was there too, looking like she'd aged 10 years overnight. You called Charles Brennan, Eleanor said to Grace, her voice deadly quiet. How did you know? Grace asked. I've been monitoring that firm for 40 years, waiting for this day. Every Wellington lawyer has standing orders to notify me if anyone ever contacts them about Williams. Indiscretion. Indiscretion, my father stood up. Is that what you call stealing a company from its rightful co-founder? She was never a co-founder. She was the help who gave William a few recipe suggestions. One of the lawyers, a young black woman named Patricia Hayes, cleared her throat. Actually, Mrs. Wellington, I've been reviewing the documents Mr. Brennan sent over. Miss Thompson's contribution went far beyond recipes. She created the entire hospitality model that the Wellington hotels still use today. She trained the first management team. She designed the signature experiences that differentiated Wellington from every other luxury hotel chain. Those are lies, Eleanor hissed. They're documented facts, Patricia continued. William Wellington recorded several meetings where he explicitly credits Miss Thompson with saving the company. He filed partnership papers in 1982, giving her 40% equity. The only reason they were never executed was her arrest and subsequent forced departure. Forced is right, Grace said quietly. You had me arrested on false charges, Eleanor. Planted that jewelry in my room. Prove it, Eleanor challenged. Grace smiled then, and for the first time I saw steel beneath her gentleness. I don't have to prove it. You see, the maid who actually took your jewelry confessed before she died. Maria Santos. Remember her? You paid her $5,000 to steal your own jewelry and hide it in my room? But guilt aided her for 40 years. She wrote a full confession and had it notarized. Her son sent it to me 3 years ago. Eleanor went white. That's impossible. Her son is a lawyer now. Funny how the children of the help sometimes grow up to be more than you expect. He tracked me down because his mother wanted me to know the truth before she died. She wanted me to know that someone else knew I was innocent. Even if that's true, it doesn't matter. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to fraud, Patricia interrupted. And using false charges to force someone to sign away their parental rights and business interests? That's fraud, coercion, and about a dozen other crimes. The room was silent. Then my father spoke. How much? How much what? Eleanor snapped. How much is Grace's 40% worth? Patricia consulted her tablet. Based on current valuations, approximately $4.8 billion. Plus 40 years of unpaid dividends, which would add another $2 billion. Conservatively, Miss Thompson is owed $6.8 billion. Grace gasped. It's impossible. It's justice, my father said. Finally, Eleanor stood up, using her cane for support. If you pursue this, I'll destroy everything. I'll liquidate the entire company before I let her have a penny. You can't, Patricia said. Ms. Thompson's ownership predates yours. Legally, she has more right to the company than you do. You married into it. She built it. I made it what it is today. With her ideas, my father said. I've been going through old records, Mother. Every innovation that made us successful came from Grace. The personalized concierge service? Her idea. The farm-to-table restaurants before they were trendy? Her connections with local farmers? The staff training program that wins us awards every year? She created it. You're rewriting history to make yourselves feel better about betraying me, Eleanor said. No, Grace said, standing up. We're finally telling the truth. And the truth is, I loved William. He loved me. We created something beautiful together. Not just Marcus, but this company. And you stole it all because you couldn't stand the idea of a black woman having something you didn't. How dare you? I dare because I'm dying, Grace said simply. What are you going to do to me that cancer isn't already doing? I have 6 months to live, Eleanor. 6 months to watch my son and grandchildren know who I really am. 6 months to reclaim what was stolen from me. And yes, 6 months to see you finally face consequences for your cruelty. Eleanor turned to my father. If you side with her, you're not my son. I never was, he replied. You made that clear every day of my life. I was your possession, your heir, your duty, but never your son. Eleanor left then, but not before turning at the door. This isn't over. I have resources you can't imagine. I'll bury you all. After she left, we sat in stunned silence. Then Grace spoke. I don't want the money. What? We all said in unison. I don't want it. What would I do with $6 billion in the time I have left? Buy a bigger hospital room? But it's yours, I insisted. You earned it. I earned it 40 years ago. Now I just want family. I want to cook for you. I want to hear about your lives. I want to pretend, just for a little while, that I got to be your grandmother all along. You can have both, my father said. The money and the family. Grace shook her head. The money comes with lawyers and fights and newspaper articles. I don't want to spend my last months in courtrooms. I want to spend them here, with you. Then we'll handle the legal stuff, my father said. You just ... be our mother. Be our grandmother. Be yourself. That afternoon, while lawyers made phone calls and papers were filed, Grace taught Victoria how to make her famous sweet potato pie. She told us stories about the early days of the hotels, about William's terrible business sense and how she'd saved him from bankruptcy 3 times before they'd even kissed. She showed us old photos she'd kept hidden, pictures of her and William that predated the one in my father's study, images of them working side by side in the kitchen, planning menus, training staff. We were partners before we were lovers, she said. That's what Eleanor could never understand. William didn't just fall for the help. He fell for his business equal who happened to be working as the help because that was the only job available to her. The Thanksgiving gala was that evening. We tried to convince Grace to skip it to avoid the drama, but she insisted on working. I'm still employed here, she said. Until I'm not, I'll do my job, but word had already spread. Somehow the news that the Wellington heir was actually the son of a black cook, that the cook actually owned 40% of the company, had reached the gossiping classes. By the time the first guests arrived, everyone knew something scandalous was afoot. Eleanor appeared at the gala in full regalia, diamonds, furs, the works. She held court in the ballroom, telling anyone who would listen that she was being victimized by a gold-digging servant and her ungrateful adopted son. Some of the old guard rallied around her, but others were skeptical. The younger generation especially seemed intrigued rather than scandalized. I was standing with Keisha, who'd driven down from Boston when I called her with the news, when I saw Grace in the kitchen through the serving window. She was orchestrating the meal service like a conductor with a symphony, her hands flying as she guided the staff through the complex dinner preparation. "That's your grandmother?" Keisha asked. "That's my grandmother, the woman who built this empire and got erased from its history. We need to change that." "How?" Keisha smiled. "Leave it to me." She pulled out her phone and started recording Grace through the window. Within minutes, she'd posted it on social media with the caption, "The real founder of the Wellington Hotels, Grace Thompson, preparing Thanksgiving dinner like she has for 40 years, even after discovering she owns 40% of the company." The post went viral within an hour. By the time dinner was served, reporters were gathering outside. The guests were buzzing with excitement and scandal, and Eleanor was losing control of the narrative she'd carefully crafted for decades. The meal was extraordinary. Grace had prepared every signature dish that had made the Wellington Hotels famous. The butternut squash soup with cardamom cream, the herb-crusted lamb with pomegranate reduction, the chocolate souffle that food critics still raved about. Each dish came with a small card explaining its history, how Grace Thompson had created it, what inspired each flavor combination. Eleanor tried to have the cards removed, but my father overruled her. The guests deserved to know who created what they're eating. Halfway through dinner, Charles Brennan Jr. arrived with a briefcase full of documents. He was a tall, distinguished black man who commanded attention the moment he entered the room. "I need to speak with Miss Thompson," he announced. Grace emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. The entire room fell silent, 500 of America's elite watching as the lawyer approached the cook. "Ms. Thompson, I've reviewed all the documentation. Your claim is ironclad. You are legally entitled to 40% of the Wellington Hotel Corporation, plus damages for fraud and coercion. If you'd like, we can file papers tonight that would freeze all company assets until this is resolved." "That won't be necessary," Grace said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "I don't want to destroy anything. I just want recognition." "Then let's recognize you properly," my father said, taking the microphone from the band leader. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to tell you all a story. It's about love, theft, and the real history of the Wellington Hotels." Eleanor tried to leave, but found her way blocked by reporters who'd somehow gotten inside. She was forced to stand there as my father told the entire truth, his real parentage. Grace's role in building the company, Eleanor's crimes in stealing both him and the business from his mother. "This woman," he said, pointing to Grace, "is not just my mother. She's the creative genius who built this empire. Every signature dish you've eaten tonight, every innovative service you've experienced at our hotels came from her mind. And for 40 years, she was erased from our history because she was black, because she was poor, because Eleanor Wellington couldn't stand the idea of sharing credit or bloodline with someone she saw as beneath her." The room erupted. Some people applauded. Others looked scandalized. Eleanor's supporters tried to defend her, but the documentation was overwhelming. Charles Brennan had brought copies of everything, Williams' recordings, the original partnership papers, even Maria Santos's confession about the planted jewelry. "This is ridiculous," Eleanor shouted. "I built this company. I managed it for 40 years. "You managed what Grace created," my father countered. "And you did it well. But you did it on a foundation of theft and lies. If it weren't for me, there would be no company. Grace would have run it into the ground. We'll never know, will we?" Grace said quietly. "Because you never gave me the chance." The party descended into chaos. Reporters pushing through the crowd, guests choosing sides, Eleanor's lawyers arriving to threaten everyone with lawsuits. But through it all, Grace stood calm in the center of the storm. Finally, she spoke again. "I want to make something clear. I don't want to destroy the Wellington Hotels. I don't want to punish anyone except Eleanor, and even her I pity more than hate. But I do want my son to know who he really is. I want my grandchildren to know where they really come from. And I want every employee of this company, especially the black and brown ones who work in the kitchens and clean the rooms, to know that one of them built this empire." A young Latina server started clapping, then a black security guard, then more staff until every employee in the room was applauding. The guests joined in, even some who'd been Eleanor's supporters moments before. Eleanor stood isolated in the middle of the ballroom, her empire crumbling around her. "You've destroyed everything," she said to Grace. "No," Grace replied. "I've set it free." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The story went national, then international. The Washington Post ran a series on hidden figures in American business. black women whose contributions had been erased from corporate histories. The Wellington hotels were flooded with bookings from people wanting to support Grace's story. Stock prices actually went up as investors realized the company's origin story made it more valuable, not less. Eleanor fought, of course. She hired the best lawyers money could buy, tried to dispute every document, every claim, but the evidence was overwhelming. More people came forward with stories of Eleanor's cruelty, her racism, her theft of credit for other people's work. Former employees revealed that she'd routinely fired black staff who showed too much talent, afraid they'd outshine her. But the real blow came from an unexpected source. William's personal secretary, now 93 and living in a nursing home, came forward with diaries she'd kept. Mr. Wellington dictated letters to Grace every day after she left, she revealed on national television. Love letters, apologies, business plans for when they could be together. Mrs. Wellington found them and burned them all, but I kept copies. I knew someday the truth would matter. The letters were heartbreaking. William's descent into depression after losing Grace. His pride in their son even though he couldn't claim him. His deteriorating marriage to Eleanor, who punished him daily for loving someone else. The only time I ever saw him happy was when he could sneak glimpses of Marcus at school events, the secretary said. He'd sit in his car outside watching his son play baseball or graduate, tears streaming down his face. He watched me? My father asked when we saw the interview. Every important moment, the secretary confirmed. He had a private investigator send him your schedule. He was there for everything, just hidden. My father broke down completely then. Both my parents watched me from afar. Both of them loved me but couldn't be with me. And Eleanor, who could have me whenever she wanted, didn't want me at all. Grace held him as he cried, 40 years of pain pouring out in her arms. The legal resolution came faster than expected. Faced with overwhelming evidence and public disgrace, Eleanor agreed to a settlement. Grace would receive her 40% of the company plus $2 billion in back dividends. Eleanor would keep her personal assets but would step down from any role in the Wellington hotels. I want one more thing, Grace said during the final negotiation. What? Eleanor asked through gritted teeth. An apology. A public apology. To me and to Marcus. Never. Then we go to trial. I'll live long enough to see you convicted of fraud, Eleanor's lawyers whispered urgently to her. Finally, she stood up. I apologize for any distress my actions may have caused. Not good enough, Grace said. Tell the truth. All of it. Eleanor's face was like stone, but she spoke. I stole your son. I stole your company. I destroyed your life because I was jealous that my husband loved you more than me. I was wrong. I'm sorry. It was barely sincere, but it was on record. It was enough. Grace used some of her money immediately, not for herself, but for others. She established the Thompson Foundation for Culinary Excellence, providing full scholarships for black and brown students to attend top culinary schools. She bought Maria Santos's son's law firm and expanded it to provide free legal services for domestic workers. She created a fund for single mothers fighting custody battles against wealthy opponents. But mostly she spent time with us. She moved into the main house. Eleanor had fled to her apartment in Paris and took over the kitchen completely. Every meal became a celebration, a lesson, a story. She taught Victoria and me to cook, passing on recipes that had built an empire. She and my father talked for hours, filling in 40 years of missed conversations. I want to show you something, she said one evening, leading us to the basement. In a corner behind old furniture was a trunk. I shipped this here when I came back. It's everything I saved. Inside were treasures. Every newspaper clipping about my father, every magazine article about the hotels, report cards she'd somehow obtained, photographs taken from afar at public events. But at the bottom was something that made us all cry. A baby book. I made this the day you were born, she told my father. I only had you for 3 days, but I documented everything. Your first cry, your first feeding, the way you gripped my finger, the song I sang to you. What song? My father asked. Grace sang then, her voice soft and worn, but still beautiful. Hush, little baby, don't you cry. Mama's going to sing you a lullaby. And if that mockingbird don't sing, Mama's going to buy you a diamond ring. I remember that, my father whispered. Somehow I remember that. When I was little, I used to hum it, and Eleanor would get angry, say I was making up nonsense songs. You remembered, Grace said, tears streaming. My baby remembered. The Wellington Empire was restructured with Grace as co-founder, and my father as CEO. Eleanor's name was removed from everything, buildings, charitable funds, even the china pattern she'd designed. It was petty, perhaps, but it was justice. Grace insisted on keeping some Wellington traditions but adding Thompson touches. The Thanksgiving Gala became the Thompson-Wellington Feast, celebrating not just family but all the workers who built the empire. The hotels instituted profit sharing for all employees, from executives to housekeepers. The corporate board went from all white to majority diverse within a year. But time was running out. Grace's cancer was aggressive, and even the best doctors money could buy could only slow it down. She grew thinner, weaker, but never lost her dignity or her joy in finally being with her family. "I want to die here," she said one day, "in this kitchen where it all began." "Don't talk about dying," my father pleaded. "Baby, I've been dying since the day they took you from me. These last months, this has been my resurrection. I got to live again. I got to be your mother again." She made it through one last Thanksgiving. This time she sat at the head of the table, too weak to cook but strong enough to direct Victoria and me as we prepared her recipes. The gathering was smaller, just family and close friends, but more genuine than any Wellington gala had ever been. "I want to make a toast," she said, raising her glass with trembling hands. "To truth, to justice, to the love that survives even when everything else is stolen, and to my son, who was brave enough to choose his real mother over his inheritance." "I got my inheritance," my father said. "I got you." Grace died on December 15th, 6 months and 3 days after she'd returned to the Wellington estate. She died in the kitchen, sitting in a chair by the stove, having just tasted the soup Victoria had made using her recipe. "Perfect," she said. "It's perfect." And then she was gone. Her funeral was unlike anything Connecticut had ever seen. Thousands came, not just the elite, but workers from every Wellington hotel, students from her foundation, families she'd helped. The church couldn't hold everyone. They had to set up screens outside. My father spoke last. "My mother was stolen from me when I was 3 days old. I was stolen from her. We lost 40 years together because of greed and prejudice and cruelty. But in the end, love won. It took 4 decades, but love won." Grace Thompson Wellington was my mother, my teacher, my conscience, and my salvation. She built an empire and walked away from it rather than lose her soul. She came back not for money, but for family. And in 6 months, she gave me more love than I'd received in 40 years. Eleanor watched the funeral on television from Paris. She sent no flowers, no card, no acknowledgement. She died 2 years later, alone except for hired nurses. In her will, she left everything to various charities, but with so many conditions and restrictions that most of them refused the donations. Her funeral was attended by fewer than 20 people. The Wellington Hotel Corporation is now the Thompson Wellington Group. Grace's portrait hangs in every lobby, with a plaque telling her real story. Her recipes are still used in every restaurant, but now with proper attribution. Her business principles, treating every employee with dignity, sharing success with those who create it, never forgetting where you come from, guide every decision. My father never fully recovered from the trauma of his stolen childhood, but he found peace in honoring Grace's legacy. He married again to a woman who understood his complicated history. Victoria became a chef, trained at the school Grace founded. And me? I became a writer determined to tell stories like Grace's, stories of people whose contributions were erased, whose children were stolen, whose lives were destroyed by those with power. I keep that photograph on my desk, the one that started it all. A young black woman and a white man holding hands by a pool, dreaming of a future that was stolen from them. But every time I look at it, I remember that the theft wasn't permanent. It took 40 years, but Grace got her son back. She got her company back, she got her dignity back. Most importantly, she got to die knowing she was loved. That she had always been loved, that nothing Eleanor did could destroy the bond between a mother and her child. The Wellington fortune was built on a lie, but the Thompson-Wellington legacy? That's built on truth, on the truth that love survives, that justice, though delayed, can still arrive, that a black woman who started as the help could end as the owner, the founder, the matriarch of an empire she created with her own hands and brilliant mind. Grace Thompson Wellington didn't just cook food. She cooked up a revolution that took 40 years to serve, and when it was finally ready, it was perfect. Just like she was. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that truth and justice should prevail no matter how long it takes, then you need to subscribe to our channel right now. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell because we share stories that matter, stories of hidden figures, stolen legacies, and the triumph of truth over lies. These aren't just stories. They're revelations that will change how you see the world. Subscribe now and join our community of truth seekers. Every week we bring you narratives that inspire, that demand justice, that prove love conquers all. Don't miss another powerful story like Grace's. Subscribe to our channel today and be part of the movement that brings hidden histories to light. Click subscribe right now.